It's June. In a few days, I'll celebrate the summer solstice and bid farewell to the sun as he begins his journey to the southern hemisphere. For those of us here in the northern hemisphere, the dark half of the year will begin. That idea of going into the dark is the journey that we dementia caregivers take, whatever time of year and wherever we live on this planet. Almost a year ago, on a different podcast, I talked about self-care rituals when your spouse has dementia. I talked about some of the many mistakes I've made in caring for my husband. I'm sharing part of that episode with you now. Mistakes and self-care rituals. That's what this episode, number 7, is all about. You're listening to My Spouse Has Dementia, a podcast that uses personal stories, occasional interviews, and simple rituals to support dementia caregiving spouses. My goal is to help us survive, because about 40% of us die first. I'm Zita Christian, writer, life cycle celebrant, caregiver. My husband has Alzheimer's, late stage. About 10 months ago, I published an episode titled Self-Care Rituals When Your Spouse Has Dementia. You have not heard that episode unless you happen to listen to my other podcast, Ritual Recipes. That's where I share rituals for weddings, baby blessings, funerals, seasonal celebrations, and a lot more. That episode did not get a lot of listeners. Still, the feedback I received from that one episode is what encouraged me to create this podcast, My Spouse Has Dementia. As I said when I recorded that earlier episode, this isn't an easy subject for me to talk about, and it might not be easy for you to hear, but please don't turn away. You might not need this episode yourself, but unfortunately, chances are pretty good that you know someone who does. My other podcast, Ritual Recipes, is now 4 years old. I've shared rituals for a lot of happy occasions. As I mentioned, weddings, baby blessings, vow renewals. I've shared rituals for sad occasions too, funerals, memorials, and funerals for pets. I've also shared rituals to align with the energy of the solstices and equinoxes, rituals to honor the ancestors, rituals to celebrate the forces of nature, her beauty and her bounty, rituals to celebrate the seasons of a woman's life, the maiden, the mother, the crone. Like you, I'm a lifelong learner, and I had just completed a course on rituals for healing. And that got me thinking about rituals that I might create to help you and me and others who are in our position as dementia caregivers for family. So at the basic level, a caregiver is someone who provides assistance to someone who is ill or disabled or otherwise incapable of taking care of himself or herself. But that definition is way too broad for what I feel qualified to talk about. So I've limited my focus to caregivers whose spouses have dementia, Alzheimer's disease in particular. I can talk about that. My husband Dick and I have been married for 40 years. It'll be 41 next month. He has Alzheimer's. And until 6 months ago, I was his only caregiver. 6 months ago, I engaged the services of a CNA, that's a certified nurse assistant. She comes to my home for 4 hours on Thursday morning and 4 hours on Friday morning. In a world where the family caregiver, that's me, is on duty 24/7, and that means 168 hours a week, having 8 hours of help a week might not seem like a lot, but it is. I'm working on a separate episode about what I've learned when it comes to getting help. But for now, I'll just say that if you're caring for a family member with dementia, start looking for help now. You'll need time to interview agencies and to have some experience with different aides. You'll probably need more time than you think for your spouse to get comfortable with having outside help. Anyway, since 2014, when my husband was diagnosed with dementia, and 2016 when diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I've come to understand that my survival depends on accepting these 2 facts. Number 1, there is no cure for Alzheimer's. And number 2, the disease is fatal. If you're on the caregiver's path, here's some statistics you need to know. Back in 2003, Ohio State University conducted a 6-year study about caregivers and dementia. They found that when it comes to family caregivers, like those of us caring for a spouse, okay, brace yourself, 63% of the caregivers die first, as in before the patient with dementia dies. Now, that statistic was from the way things were almost 20 years ago. More recently, a 2018 study by Stanford Medicine referred to the strain on those caring for a family member with Alzheimer's. Their estimates were closer to 40% of caregivers dying first. That's certainly better than 63%, but it's still not good. Here's what I think is a key takeaway from that report. As they said in the report, it isn't disease or accident that takes these caregivers, but rather the sheer physical, spiritual, and emotional toll of caring for someone struggling with Alzheimer's. Okay, so that same year, 2018, the National Library of Medicine, and that's a member of the National Institutes of Health, issued a report. And the National Library of Medicine had reviewed 17 years worth of studies about the effects of caring for a family member with Alzheimer's or other dementia. They found mixed overall effects of being a family member caring for someone with dementia. They concluded that the caregiving itself is not directly associated with an increased risk of death of the caregiver. According to the report, the rate of caregiver mortality is aligned with how the caregiver interprets the stress and strain. I read that and I could see a spectrum of responses from, "I've got this under control." Yeah, and that's where I was a long time ago, to, "I can't do this one more minute." And I've been there too. As you can imagine, there's a gulf of feelings between those 2 points. Still, it's the best news I've heard in a long time. It speaks to the importance of how I view the stress that I'm under. Let me just say that most of the time I feel pretty strong, but there have been times when I've gone from loving compassion to anger in seconds. And I have 2 important things to say about that. Number 1, I've come to realize that at the heart of my anger is the fear that if my husband doesn't listen to me, he's going to hurt himself. That's like the times I've screamed at him to get away from the top of the stairs. And number 2, ritual is the best way for me to manage stress. Now, that said, people are different, and I know that. When I told you about the 2003 study, that's the study about how 63% of dementia family caregivers die first, did you feel a little sick to your stomach? I know I did. I remember my instant reaction when I heard that statistic. I want to live. And my guess is you do too. So set yourself a goal right now. Simple math. 63% of caregivers die first. You want to be in the 37% who survive. And that leads me to ritual number 1. I call it simply 37%. If you have a pen and paper handy, grab it and write down 37%. Write it 3 times. If you don't have pen and paper handy, use your finger and write 37% on your palm. Write it 3 times. Now blow gently on the paper or on your palm. Doing that, you're adding your breath, your spirit, to your intent to survive, to be in the 37% of the statistic. And you've just done a ritual, a visible act, performed with invisible intent. And yeah, it can be that simple. From now on, whenever you feel overwhelmed by the challenge of caregiving, write 37% on a piece of paper, on your hand, or write it in the air. From my years as a certified handwriting analyst, and yeah, that was a long time ago, I know that the physical act of writing, not typing, stimulates something in the brain. Will writing 37% make you feel less overwhelmed? No, hardly. what it will do is remind you of why you need to take care of yourself. For all of us, there's a big difference between knowing something in your brain and accepting it in your heart. Looking back to 2014, when my husband was first diagnosed with dementia, I can see how the disease progressed. He'd come to the point where he didn't read anymore, couldn't count money. It was dangerous for him to drive. I made arrangements for the car to have a new home, and I'll talk about that on another episode. Anyway, time passed, and things got worse. I knew I had to make changes to my will, power of attorney, and other end-of-life documents. So I met with my attorney. He helped me revise everything to reflect this new reality of my marriage. My attorney emailed the documents to me so that I could review and sign them. It took me almost 2 years. Yeah, years. Why? Because I couldn't move past the fact that Dick would no longer have my power of attorney. He would no longer be able to make medical decisions for me should I become incapacitated. Now you might think, well, duh, of course he can't. He has Alzheimer's. In the margin of the draft of my new will, I wrote a note to my attorney, and it said, "But what if there's a cure?" You see, it took me 2 years to realize that I was still in denial. Alzheimer's is fatal, and there is no cure. And that brings me to ritual number 2. I call it create and destroy. Tibetan Buddhist monks have a tradition in which they create intricate, colorful sand mandalas and then destroy them. The creation requires patience, focus, and stillness. It can take weeks. The destruction is swift. There are plenty of YouTube videos that encapsulate the exquisite creation and the total destruction. The purpose is to remind all involved, those creating, those destroying, and those observing, that nothing is permanent. Caregivers of spouses with dementia need to remember that truth. Denying it can be deadly. Now, there are plenty of do-it-yourself sand mandala kits you can buy online to make the process a ritual for caregivers, though. Simply add intention. How do you do that? Okay, you attach a loving memory of your spouse to every color that you use. These are your memories, so you decide which colors represent which memories. But here are 3 examples to get you started. When you use green, remember what you grew together. That could, of course, refer to having children. It could also apply to growing a business, a community, a garden, or the support for a grassroots cause. Remember, too, that when something grows, it changes. And oftentimes, its container breaks. It takes on a life of its own. The growing pains may give you a whole new role in your relationship, or you may have no place in the new picture. And you have to accept it. You left a legacy together, and let that be enough. When you use red, remember the passion that you shared. Think back to when you met, to that first eye-to-body contact. What did you see that you liked so much? What about eye-to-eye contact? Was there a simple curiosity or courtesy or a magnetic attraction? What about voice-to-voice? Who spoke first? How did the conversation progress? What did you learn about each other? Then go to hand-to-hand, hand-to-head, mouth-to-mouth. The progression of contact continues to physical intimacy. As for the steps, use your imagination. I don't want to jeopardize the clean rating that I have for this podcast. Now keep in mind that when an intimate relationship is in trouble, the first point of contact to disappear is hand to head. I would always point that out to my students when I taught a class on writing romance novels. I'm telling you that now to emphasize the importance of combing your loved one's hair, stroking your loved one's head. That hand-to-head contact speaks volumes. Long, long ago, many cultures believed, and I think many of them still do, that a person's spirit lives in the head. And that's why you'll often see skulls in rituals of ancestor worship. It's not intended to be gory or scary. The intent is to honor the ancestor's spirit because it resides in the head. Now bring that idea into the present. Look at wedding photos, especially photos of that first kiss. As a wedding officiant, I've seen a lot of those first kisses, and when the groom slides his hand around the back of the bride's head, or she strokes his cheek or he cups her face just a second before they kiss, I imagine that on some cosmic level, each is compelled to touch the other person's spirit. And of course, those examples go for bride and bride weddings, groom and groom weddings. In other episodes of my Ritual Recipes podcast, I've talked about how energy in the heart chakra is expressed through the hands, making touch the physical expression of love. So you can see how the head, the heart, and the hands are all connected. Think about all the ways you connect with your spouse as you work with the color red. When you use yellow, remember how and what the two of you communicated. Laughter is the best medicine. How did you use it to boost each other? Did you use it to soothe and heal each other's pain? Did you write and or read poetry to each other? Did you call each other by a special name or share a secret handshake, a coded gesture? Do you have a song that you consider ours? You'll notice that I phrased some of these examples in the past. And that's because the ability to communicate with a spouse who has dementia, well, it fades. It happens slowly at first. In fact, so slowly that you might not realize there's now a little fracture in the connection that you once shared. You might not even realize when the connection breaks. But then more and more connections break. And then the day comes when your spouse doesn't speak in sentences. Or if he does, the words don't make any sense. Or the words do make sense, and they hurt. And yet, you can tell yourself that it's the disease swearing at you, not the spouse you love. That can be hard to remember in the moment when you're exhausted from continually cleaning bathrooms, washing soiled clothing, soiled sheets, shampooing soiled carpets. If you don't take care of yourself, if you don't get enough sleep, your nerves will feel frazzled. Your own words will turn sharp. Feelings that rise in a moment of anger and frustration can vanish suddenly, but the energy of your words will hang in the air like a bad odor. So before you say something you'll regret, walk away. Go outside. If that isn't possible, go to another room. But you have to break the connection. You have to defrag. Now, rewind to what I was saying about that sand mandala. You don't have to purchase a sand mandala kit. Go to your kitchen. Get a plate, the plainest one you have, and then go to your spice cabinet. Pull paprika for red, dill for green, curry for yellow, and make a spice painting. When your painting, sand or spice, is finished, spend some time reflecting on the memories that you honored in the colors you chose. Give yourself a few hours or days. And then when the time comes to destroy the painting, and you have to do that, light a candle. Fire is the element of desire, of passion, of willpower, and creativity. And remember that the purpose of creating and destroying a sand mandala is to accept that nothing is permanent. In your marriage, the time will come when you have to let go. Destroying your sand painting now might help you accept that truth. And now ritual number 3. I call it simply a water ritual. In astrology, there's a basic understanding about the 4 elements. Fire acts, earth plans, air thinks, water feels. I use those fundamental building blocks in creating rituals. Now, sometimes the watery realm of feelings is labeled by some as wimpy. I suspect that those who affix such a label fear the power of their feelings. We hear it in the phrase, a flood of emotions. And yet we all know that water nurtures life. Or, viewed from another perspective, thirst kills. One of the most elemental things you can do to take care of yourself is to stay hydrated. Drink water. And there's something else you can do. Get wet. In many magical traditions, each of the 4 elements is associated with each of the 4 directions. Water is often associated with the west, the direction the sun goes every day to die. The idea is that the sun sinks into the water where it is soothed and cleansed. That concept is extended to humans. When a person dies, it's thought that the spirit journeys to the west, to the realm of water, and there the spirit is soothed, cleansed, and forgiven. As a caregiver whose spouse has dementia, you need to feel soothed, cleansed, and forgiven. Now I want to take those ideas one at a time. Number 1, you need to feel soothed. People who know your situation, they're going to be quick to ask how your spouse is doing, but only a few are going to ask how you're doing. I think they avoid the question because they're afraid of your answer, not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to help. Water is soothing. Stand under a shower, or soak in a tub, or step into a river, or go walk in the rain. As your skin gets wet, invite the water to prime the pump for your tears. Mixed emotions, and you're going to have plenty of them. Those mixed emotions can dam up your tears, and you need to release them. Now, number 2, you need to feel cleansed. I'm not talking about physical cleanliness, although caring for someone who needs help to eat, to toilet, to bathe, can create your own need for, old-fashioned soap and water and laundry soap. No, I'm talking about the need to feel cleansed, as in a fresh start, a new day, another chance to get it right. I say that because you will make mistakes. Here are 3 examples, all from personal experience. Number 1, you'll forget to put the traveling packet of your spouse's meds in your purse. And when you realize it's time for the next dose, you'll realize you don't have the medicine, and you'll realize you're an hour away from home. Number 2, you'll overestimate how much energy your spouse has. Driving 2 miles to the neighborhood grocery store to pick up a few things, that won't take long. But if the store is crowded, or someone knocks over a display of apples, or a tired baby is crying, your spouse's anxiety can escalate to agitation in seconds. And number 3, if your spouse is male and you have no experience with disposable undergarments for men, you might put them on backwards the first time. You'll also learn that disposable undergarments are made for urinary incontinence. To date, I haven't found a good solution for bowel incontinence. If you have, gosh, please let me know. Either way, though, you'll learn to keep an emergency kit in the car. That's several pieces of disposable underwear, some sanitary wipes, a full set of clothes, including shoes and socks, lots of paper towels, and several plastic bags. So as you step into the cleansing water, say out loud, "I do the best I can." You're not saying, "I want to do the best I can," or "I'm going to do the best I can." You say, "I do the best I can." And say it 3 times. And finally, number 3, you need to feel forgiven. More accurately, you need to forgive yourself. Under any circumstances, being a caregiver to someone with dementia is hard. Being a family caregiver adds a layer of difficulty, especially if you're caring for your spouse. Your relationship has a history, and now not only are you constantly walking the liminal path between who you were as a couple and who you are now, you are also grieving the couple that you will never be. One of the steps in grieving is anger. You'll get angry at the universe, at God, at the force, at whatever you call a higher power, or simply at fate. You may quote Robert Browning, the poet who wrote, "Grow old along with me. The best is yet to be, the last of life for which the first was made." You'll quote him and swear or scream or both. And even if you've never heard of Browning, you'll know the sentiment. You'll feel that life cheated you. You'll look at the reality of your marriage and you'll say, "This isn't what I signed up for." Oh, but it is. You signed up for this in the vow that you made on your wedding day, in sickness and in health. So remember that water is soothing. And now when you stand under a shower, or you soak in a tub, or step into a river, or walk in the rain, don't flinch at the truth. Alzheimer's is fatal. There is no cure. Forgive yourself for thinking about what your life will be like when your spouse is gone. Your goal is to survive. Eventually, reality comes into focus, and when it does, you'll see the road you're on. You'll recognize the child in each of you. You'll see the depth of each other's wounds. You'll stroke the scars, and you'll cry. Connecting with words will be, a one-way conversation. Instead, you'll connect by sharing a bowl of finger foods, or by tucking a favorite blanket around chilly shoulders, or by holding hands as Anne Murray sings, "Could I Have This Dance?" These little things are gifts. They wait for you right over each hill, around each bend, but you'll miss them if you don't accept the truth. Alzheimer's is fatal. There is no cure. It's also true that if you are a caregiver and your spouse has dementia, your appraisal of the stress and strain of caregiving has a huge impact on your own mortality. Rituals can help you stay balanced and stay strong. How? By providing a meaningful container for your feelings. The rituals I shared in this episode are deceptively simple, but don't be fooled. They're also powerful. You'll see. On the next episode, I'm going to tell you what has happened in this last month. My husband fell 11 times. My neighbors helped me get him up many of those times. I had to call the EMTs 3 times. Dick went to the emergency room by ambulance twice. All of the falls were dangerous, but one of them could easily have been deadly. And the only reason it wasn't was because of my neighbors. I'll tell you all about that the next time, not because there's anything sensational, but because you need to know what could happen. In the meantime, if you know a family caregiver for someone with dementia, or a caregiver whose spouse has dementia, friends and family of dementia caregivers, please tell them about this podcast. Oh, one more. If you know someone you wish knew what you're going through, tell them about the podcast too. Might make it easier to have a necessary conversation. Just let them all know that the easiest way to listen is just go to my website, myspouseHasDementia.com. You can listen right from there. And once you're there, if you decide to subscribe, and I hope you do, you'll find buttons for Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, Amazon Music, and an old-fashioned RSS feed. Now, when I say take good care of yourself, those words aren't fluffy. They're fierce. We need to survive. Thanks for listening.